heavy, silent, almost invisible. The anaconda has ruled South America's rivers for millions of years. No venom, no roar, just muscle, patience, and overwhelming force. A predator designed not to chase, but to wait. Because it is feared, anacondas are hunted, displaced, and blamed for attacks that are rare but deeply unsettling. They are seen as a threat, a mistake of nature, an enemy people would rather erase. So what if one day the largest snake on Earth simply vanished? What if the anaconda disappeared completely? What if anacondas disappeared completely, not as a slow decline, not as a local extinction, but as a sudden and total absence across their entire natural range? This scenario assumes that every anaconda is removed at the same moment from the Amazon basin, its wetlands, floodplains, and river systems. There is no warning period for the ecosystem, no gradual adjustment, and no time for other species to adapt in advance. Just as importantly, nothing else changes. Climate patterns remain stable. Human activity does not intensify, no new predators evolve or migrate to fill the gap. The only variable altered is the disappearance of the anaconda itself. This matters because it isolates cause and effect. By holding every other factor constant, we can observe how much of the system's balance depended on this single species. This is not speculation built on fear or imagination, but a controlled ecological thought experiment commonly used in systems ecology to reveal hidden dependencies. In this context, the anaconda is not a monster or a symbol. It is a working component of the ecosystem. And to understand the consequences of its absence, we must first understand what that component actually does. Anacondas are not fast, they are not aggressive hunters, and they are not constantly killing. What makes them powerful is efficiency. The green anaconda is the heaviest snake on Earth, often weighing over 200 kilograms. Its body is built for water, dense muscle, slow metabolism, and the ability to remain submerged for long periods with only eyes and nostrils exposed. In muddy rivers and flooded forests, this makes it nearly invisible. Anacondas hunt by ambush. They target prey that comes to drink, swim, or cross waterways. Capybaras, large birds, fish, caimans, and even deer are all part of their diet. This wide range matters. It means anacondas do not control just one population, but several, both aquatic and terrestrial. They are also energy-efficient predators. An anaconda can survive for weeks after a single large meal. That limits how often it hunts, preventing constant pressure on prey species. Ecologically, anacondas function as population stabilizers, not exterminators. They remove weak, injured, or careless animals, subtly shaping how prey move, where they drink, and which areas they avoid. Fear is part of their influence. Many animals change their behavior simply because an anaconda might be present. This invisible pressure keeps riverbanks, wetlands, and flooded forests in balance. Once that pressure disappears, the system does not stay the same. At first, removing the anaconda appears to solve a simple problem. A large feared predator is gone, and the immediate environment feels more accessible. Rivers that once demanded caution now invite routine use. Wetlands expand as working spaces rather than avoided zones. This early sense of improvement is real, but it rests on a misunderstanding. The assumption that danger and regulation are the same thing. In reality, the anaconda's influence was never about constant predation. It was about shaping behavior through uncertainty. As a predator that operates precisely where land and water meet, it introduced risk into moments that prey could never fully control: drinking, grazing, crossing, lingering. Over time, this uncertainty prevented repetition. Animals moved not because they were chased, but because staying too long was never safe. Pressure spread across space, and that spreading is what kept stress low in any one place. Once the anaconda disappears, that uncertainty collapses, and behavior begins to stabilize in ways that seem harmless but are structurally dangerous. Semi-aquatic herbivores, such as capybaras, no longer need to rotate their use of riverbanks. They return to the same locations again and again, not driven by population explosion, but by consistency. Grazing becomes concentrated. Young vegetation is removed before it can anchor soil. Root systems weaken gradually, unnoticed, because nothing dramatic appears to be happening. As this concentrated pressure continues, riverbanks begin to lose their physical integrity. Without dense roots, soil erodes more easily and fine sediment enters the water. This subtly alters flow speed and water clarity, which immediately feeds back into aquatic life. Larger fish species, no longer subject to occasional predation, gain an advantage and expand aggressively. In doing so, they reduce smaller species that once played key roles in filtering water and stabilizing nutrient cycles. The food web becomes simpler, and with fewer layers, it becomes less forgiving. At this stage, the ecosystem has not collapsed. It has changed character. Instead of absorbing variation, it begins amplifying it. Periods of high productivity are followed by sharper declines. Recovery slows after each disruption because the buffers that once absorbed stress no longer exist. The system becomes efficient but brittle. Other predators respond to this opening, but response does not mean replacement. Caimans expand into areas once dominated by anacondas, yet their presence reshapes behavior differently. Where anacondas created avoidance without pursuit, caimans introduce active confrontation. Prey animals respond by clustering in fewer perceived safe zones or by taking greater risks elsewhere. Pressure that was once diffuse becomes concentrated, accelerating degradation in both heavily used areas and abandoned ones. Fragmentation replaces balance. These ecological shifts begin to surface in human systems not through crisis, but through inconsistency. Farmland near rivers experiences irregular crop damage as herbivores move freely between wetlands and fields. Attempts to control this through hunting reduce numbers locally but fail to restore behavioral pressure, creating cycles of decline and rebound rather than stability. Fishing communities encounter similar patterns as simplified aquatic food webs swing between short-lived abundance and sudden collapse, turning livelihoods into seasonal uncertainty. As these pressures accumulate, infrastructure becomes increasingly misaligned with reality. River channels migrate faster due to erosion and sediment buildup. Transport routes require constant adjustment. Flood prediction models based on historical patterns lose accuracy, not because climate has suddenly changed, but because the landscape no longer behaves the way it once did. The most dangerous phase follows, a prolonged period where nothing seems to break. Each problem appears manageable in isolation. A damaged bank is reinforced. A poor fishing season is endured. Adaptation feels possible. Yet ecosystems do not fail incrementally. They fail when altered components synchronize. That synchronization arrives when weakened riverbanks, simplified food webs, and concentrated animal movement intersect with a strong, but not unprecedented, rainy season. Water spreads faster over land that can no longer absorb it and lingers on floodplains stripped of stabilizing vegetation. Flooding reaches areas previously considered safe, not because rainfall is extraordinary, but because regulation has quietly eroded. Displaced wildlife enters human settlements. Disease risks rise. Emergency responses strain under events that fall just outside expectation rather than outside history. There is no correction, no replacement force restoring uncertainty at the land-water interface. What vanished was not a predator, but a constraint. The anaconda never made this ecosystem safe. It made it predictable. By shaping behavior rather than enforcing control, it allowed pressure to disperse instead of accumulate. Despite how coherent this chain of consequences appears, it is important to step back into reality. A sudden, total disappearance of anacondas across all ecosystems is extremely unlikely. They inhabit vast, remote regions, reproduce steadily, and are not dependent on a single fragile condition for survival. In the real world, ecological change tends to be uneven and gradual, giving systems time, however imperfect, to adjust. More importantly, ecosystems rarely lose regulation all at once. When a predator declines slowly, other forces partially compensate. Prey behavior adapts incrementally, competing predators adjust their niches, and human pressure reshapes landscapes over decades rather than seasons. These adjustments are messy, but they reduce the risk of abrupt systemic collapse. What this scenario reveals, then, is not a prediction, but a principle. It shows how stability often depends less on visible dominance than on invisible constraints. The anaconda's influence is subtle precisely because it works through behavior rather than force. When that influence is removed instantly in theory, the hidden architecture of the ecosystem becomes visible through its failure. The scientific takeaway is not fear of losing anacondas, but recognition of how easily regulation can be mistaken for threat, and how costly that mistake can become when made at scale. The anaconda was never the villain of the river. It was the rule the river lived by. When it disappears, nothing explodes. Nothing collapses overnight. Life even seems easier, for a while. But without the pressure that once shaped behavior, stability fades quietly, replaced by a system that reacts instead of regulates, that fluctuates instead of balances. The most dangerous changes are not the ones we fear, but the ones we misunderstand. And if removing a single silent predator can quietly reshape an entire ecosystem, what if another apex species disappeared next?